The first thing I noticed was the smell of crayons, not the faint, nostalgic scent of childhood art projects, but the overwhelming, waxy, industrial-strength odor of dozens of crayons being used simultaneously in a space that was never designed to hold more than 10 people. I stood on the gravel path leading to my old schoolhouse, the one my grandfather had deeded to me 6 years ago, and stared at the scene unfolding through the wavy glass windows. Inside, under the warm glow of the antique brass light fixtures I had personally rewired, sat 23 children at folding tables I had never seen before. A woman with a blonde bob and a lime green HOA polo shirt was gesturing at a whiteboard that had been propped against my grandmother's original chalkboard. The whiteboard read, in cheerful red marker, "Welcome to HOA Community Craft Hour." My hands tightened around the leather folder I was carrying. The folder contained a photocopy of the original 1923 deed, a survey map from 1954, and a letter from the county recorder's office that I had picked up only 45 minutes earlier. I had come to the schoolhouse to retrieve my grandfather's old attendance ledger for a local history project. I had not expected to find a fully operational, unauthorized classroom. A woman I didn't recognize, holding a toddler on her hip, approached me from the side. She looked relieved. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. "Are you with the HOA? My son has been asking to use the bathroom for 10 minutes, and the teacher said there isn't one inside. Is there a portable toilet somewhere?" I turned to look at her. Her son, a small boy with a serious face, was doing the unmistakable potty dance. I felt a cold, calm anger settle into my chest. "There's no bathroom," I said quietly. "This building was built in 1901. It was never plumbed for one." The mother's expression shifted from relief to confusion to dawning concern. "But the HOA flyer said this was a fully equipped community education space. I paid $40 for this workshop." I looked back through the window. The woman in the lime green polo, whom I now recognized as Patricia Barlow, the HOA board president, was helping a child glue macaroni onto construction paper. She looked utterly at home, utterly in charge, and utterly unaware that she was standing on private property that had never been opened for public use. She had no idea that the document sitting in my folder would end her entire claim before the glue dried. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious who else has dealt with an HOA that thinks the whole world is their clubhouse. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 34 years old, a historical preservation consultant, and the sole owner of a one-room schoolhouse that sits on a half-acre parcel at the edge of the Willowbrook subdivision. The schoolhouse, officially known as Vance School No. 4 on the County Historical Register, was built by my great-grandfather, Samuel Vance, in 1901. He taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to farm children until the county consolidated the rural schools in 1944. After that, the building became a storage shed, then a forgotten relic, and finally, under my grandfather's care, a private family museum. My grandfather, Henry Vance, spent his retirement restoring the schoolhouse. He replaced the rotted clapboard siding, reglazed every wavy glass window, and refinished the original pine floors until they glowed like honey. He died when I was 28, and in his will, he left me the schoolhouse and the land it sat on, separate from the main family farm that my cousin inherited. The deed was clear. The property was to be used for private historical preservation and family enjoyment, a restriction my grandfather had added to prevent any future owner from turning it into a commercial space or subdividing the land. I had honored that restriction meticulously. I kept the schoolhouse exactly as my grandfather had left it. The 20 wooden desks with their cast-iron frames, the slate chalkboard with his final lesson still written in chalk under a protective sheet of glass, the potbelly stove that had warmed generations of Vance children, and the wall of framed photographs showing each class that had learned their letters under that roof. I visited every Sunday. I dusted the desks, I oiled the stove, I sat in the teacher's chair, and read my grandfather's journals. The schoolhouse was not just a building. It was the physical manifestation of my family's history, and it was the place where I felt closest to the man who had raised me after my parents died. I had never wanted to live in a subdivision. The Willowbrook community had grown up around the schoolhouse gradually, starting in the 1990s, when a developer bought the surrounding farmland and built 200 identical houses with identical mailboxes and identical expectations about property values. The HOA was established in 1997, long after the schoolhouse deed was recorded, and the schoolhouse parcel was explicitly excluded from the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. My grandfather had refused to join. He had told the developer, in polite but firm language, that his schoolhouse would never be subject to the rules of a homeowners association he hadn't asked for. The developer had agreed, and the exclusion was documented in the original HOA filings. I had a copy of that exclusion in my folder, along with a letter from the HOA's own attorney, dated 1998, confirming that the schoolhouse was not part of the association and was not subject to its rules. I had never needed to use that letter. For 6 years, the HOA had left me alone. I paid my property taxes, I maintained the building, and I kept the grass trimmed. The neighbors waved when they walked past. A few asked about the history, and I always invited them in for a tour. I liked being the quiet custodian of a small piece of local history. Then Patricia Barlow was elected HOA president. Patricia was a retired corporate trainer who had moved to Willowbrook 3 years ago with her husband, a man so quiet I had never learned his first name. She drove a white Lexus SUV, carried a clipboard everywhere, and spoke in the clipped, confident tones of someone who had spent her career telling other people what to do. She had run for the HOA board on a platform of community enrichment and maximizing shared resources. I had not attended the meeting. I was not a member. The first violation happened on a Tuesday morning in late September. I had driven to the schoolhouse to measure the windows for new storm shutters. As I pulled up, I saw Patricia's white Lexus parked on the gravel shoulder. She was standing at the schoolhouse door, peering through the glass, her clipboard pressed against her chest. She turned when she heard my truck. "Eleanor, good morning," she said, as if we had a standing appointment. "I'm so glad I caught you. I've been meaning to discuss the schoolhouse with you." I got out of the truck and closed the door. "What about it?" Patricia smiled. It was a practice smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. The HOA board has been discussing ways to expand our community programming, and several residents have mentioned that the old schoolhouse would be a perfect venue for our educational workshops. It's just sitting here empty most of the time, and it has such wonderful historical character. We'd like to schedule a few classes, craft workshops, board training sessions, maybe a book club, nothing too disruptive. I looked at her for a long moment. "The schoolhouse isn't part of the HOA," I said. "It's private property. It's not available for community programming." Patricia's smile didn't waver. "Oh, I understand that technically it's not within the HOA boundaries, but it's surrounded by the community. It's a shared historical resource. The residents feel a connection to it. And honestly, Eleanor, it would be such a wonderful way to give back. The HOA would handle all the logistics. You wouldn't have to do a thing." "No," I said. "The building isn't set up for public use. There's no bathroom, no running water, and the insurance doesn't cover public access. It's a private preservation space." Patricia's smile tightened. "I'm sure we could work around those issues. The HOA has insurance. We could bring in a portable toilet. The children would love it." "There won't be any children," I said. "The schoolhouse is not open to the public. Please don't schedule anything there." I walked past her, unlocked the door, and went inside. I closed the door behind me. Through the window, I watched Patricia stand there for a full minute, writing something on her clipboard. Then she got into her Lexus and drove away. I assumed that was the end of it. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, I received a text from my cousin, Daniel. Daniel was the one who had inherited the main farmhouse and the surrounding acreage. He was a carpenter, and he had spent 2 summers helping our grandfather restore the schoolhouse floors. His text read, "Hey, did you know there's a craft class happening at the schoolhouse right now? Just drove past. There's like 20 kids inside." I called him immediately. "What are you talking about?" "I'm serious," Daniel said. "I saw a bunch of minivans parked on the shoulder, and there's a woman in a green shirt leading kids inside. I thought you had started some kind of program." I told Daniel I'd call him back and hung up. I was at my office, 40 minutes away. I grabbed my keys and drove. When I arrived, the class was in full swing. The folding tables, the whiteboard, the macaroni art, the mother with the potty training toddler. Patricia was at the front of the room, demonstrating how to glue dried beans onto a picture frame. She saw me through the window and waved, her expression one of cheerful welcome. I didn't wave back. I walked to the door and opened it. The smell of crayons and glue hit me like a wall. 23 small faces turned to look at me. Patricia clapped her hands. "Children, this is Miss Eleanor. She owns this lovely building. Say hello." A chorus of Hello, Miss Eleanor filled the room. I looked at Patricia. Can I speak with you outside, please? Patricia's smile flickered. Of course. Children, keep working on your frames. Mrs. Patterson will help you. A woman I assumed was Mrs. Patterson, another HOA volunteer, nodded and took Patricia's place at the front. Patricia followed me outside. I closed the door behind us. What are you doing? I asked. My voice was quiet, but I could feel the anger vibrating under my skin. Patricia smoothed her polo shirt. The HOA Education Committee voted to begin our fall workshop series. The schoolhouse was the perfect venue. We sent out a flyer to all residents. We've had a wonderful response. $40 per child for a 6-week session. I told you no, I said. I told you the schoolhouse is not open to the public. You didn't ask permission. You didn't even tell me you were doing this. Patricia's expression shifted from cheerful to condescending. Eleanor, I think you're overreacting. This is a community service. The schoolhouse is a historical education space. It belongs to the whole community in spirit, even if the deed is in your name. The HOA board voted unanimously to designate it as a shared resource for educational programming. We're not damaging anything. We're using it exactly as it was intended to be used. It was intended to be used by my family, I said. It's private property. You're trespassing. Patricia laughed. It was a small, dismissive sound. Trespassing? We're holding a children's craft class, not a rave. The residents support this. The board supports this. I'm sure if you just think about it, you'll see that this is a wonderful opportunity for the schoolhouse to be appreciated by the whole neighborhood. I looked at her. She was utterly confident. She believed with every fiber of her being that her authority as HOA president extended to my property. She believed that the community's desire to use the schoolhouse outweighed my right to say no. She believed that I would eventually give in, because people like Patricia always believed that people like me would eventually give in. She was wrong. The class ends now, I said. You have 15 minutes to get the children out of my building. Patricia's smile finally disappeared. Eleanor, be reasonable. The parents have paid. The children are enjoying themselves. You can't just shut this down. 15 minutes, I said. Then I'm calling the sheriff. I turned and walked back to my truck. I sat in the driver's seat and watched through the windshield as Patricia stood frozen on the gravel path, her clipboard dangling from her hand. After a moment, she straightened her shoulders and walked back inside. I didn't call the sheriff that day. I wanted to, but I knew that a confrontation in front of 23 children and their parents would only make me look like the villain. Patricia was counting on that. She was counting on my reluctance to cause a scene. So I sat in my truck and waited. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Finally, the door opened and the children began to file out, each one clutching a macaroni-covered picture frame. The parents collected them from the gravel path, shooting curious glances at my truck. Patricia was the last to leave. She locked the schoolhouse door with a key I had not given her. She walked to her Lexus, placed her clipboard on the passenger seat, and drove away without looking at me. I waited until her car disappeared around the curve. Then I got out of my truck, walked to the schoolhouse door, and examined the lock. It was my grandfather's original lock, a heavy brass mechanism that required a skeleton key. I had the only 2 copies, or so I had thought. Patricia had somehow obtained a 3rd key. I didn't know how, I didn't know when, but I knew, standing there on the gravel path with the smell of crayons still drifting through the open windows, that this was not going to end with a polite conversation. I drove home and started a folder. I labeled it Schoolhouse HOA. The first item I placed inside was a printed copy of the HOA's fall workshop flyer, which I found posted on the community bulletin board near the subdivision entrance. The flyer featured a photograph of my schoolhouse, taken without my permission, with the text, "Join us for HOA Community Craft Hour. Historic Vance Schoolhouse, 6-week session, $40 per child. All materials included. Limited spaces available." The second item was a screenshot of the HOA's website, where the workshop was listed under Community Education Programs. The third item was a photograph of the folding tables and the whiteboard inside my schoolhouse, taken through the window. The fourth item was a note documenting my conversation with Patricia, including the date, time, and her exact words. The schoolhouse is a historical education space. It belongs to the whole community in spirit. I didn't argue with her. I put it in the folder. The escalation came faster than I expected. 2 days after the craft class, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. The letter was printed on heavy, cream-colored paper, with the law firm's letterhead embossed in gold. It informed me that the HOA board had voted to designate the Vance Schoolhouse as a community educational resource under the association's bylaws, and that my refusal to allow access constituted a violation of the community's shared interest in historical preservation. The letter did not cite any specific law, covenant, or deed restriction. It simply asserted, in formal legal language, that the HOA had the authority to use the schoolhouse for educational programming because the schoolhouse was historically and functionally integrated into the community. The letter also informed me that the HOA would be holding a board meeting the following week to discuss compliance measures, and that my attendance was strongly encouraged. I read the letter 3 times. Then I placed it in the folder. The board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a beige building with a fake fireplace and rows of folding chairs. I arrived early and sat in the back row. The room slowly filled with residents. I recognized a few faces. The mother from the craft class, a retired couple who walked their dog past the schoolhouse every morning, a man who had once asked me if I would sell the property to a developer. Patricia sat at the front of the room, flanked by 4 other board members. She was wearing a navy blazer over her lime green polo, and she had a stack of papers arranged neatly in front of her. She looked like a principal about to address a school assembly. The meeting began with routine business: budget reports, landscaping updates, a discussion about mailbox colors. Then Patricia tapped her gavel on the table. "Now we come to the matter of the Vance Schoolhouse," she said. "As many of you know, the Education Committee has launched a wonderful new workshop series using the historic schoolhouse at the edge of our community. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. However, the property owner has raised some concerns about access." She looked directly at me. "Eleanor, would you like to address the board?" I stood up. I had not prepared a speech. I didn't need one. "The schoolhouse is private property," I said. "It is not part of the HOA. It was explicitly excluded from the HOA's covenants when the subdivision was built. The HOA has no authority to use it for any purpose. I have asked Patricia to stop holding classes there, and she has refused. I am now asking the board to confirm, in writing, that the HOA will cease all unauthorized use of my property." A board member to Patricia's left, a man with a gray mustache and a golf shirt, leaned forward. "Now, Eleanor, I think we all appreciate the historical value of the schoolhouse. But Patricia has made a compelling case that the building is a community asset. The HOA has a responsibility to provide educational programming for our residents. Surely we can work out some kind of shared use agreement." "No," I said. "The building is not available for shared use. It is a private preservation space. It has no bathroom, no running water, and no insurance for public access. Using it for children's classes is a safety violation." Patricia smiled. "We've addressed the safety concerns. The HOA's insurance policy covers community events. We've rented a portable toilet for the duration of the workshop series. The children are supervised at all times. There's no risk." "The risk is to the building," I said. "It's a historic structure. The floors were restored by hand. The windows are original. The desks are antiques. 23 children with glue and scissors is not a preservation activity." The mustached board member sighed. "Eleanor, I understand your attachment to the building, but you have to understand that the community has a legitimate interest in its use. The schoolhouse has been a landmark in this area for over a century. It's part of our shared heritage. It's part of my family's heritage," I said. "And my family's deed says it's private property. Unless the HOA has a document that says otherwise, this discussion is over." Patricia's smile widened. She had been waiting for this. "Actually, Eleanor, we do have a document." She pulled a sheet of paper from her stack and held it up. "This is a copy of the original HOA covenants, filed in 1997. Section 14, paragraph C, states that the HOA has the authority to designate historically significant structures within or adjacent to the community as shared educational resources, provided that such designation serves the community's cultural enrichment." She placed the paper on the table. "The schoolhouse is adjacent to the community. It is historically significant. The board has voted to designate it as a shared educational resource. We have the authority." I walked to the table and looked at the paper. It was a photocopy of a photocopy, the text slightly blurred. I read Section 14, paragraph C. The language was exactly as Patricia had quoted. But there was a problem. "This covenant applies to structures within or adjacent to the community," I said. But the schoolhouse deed predates the HOA by 96 years. The deed includes a restriction that the property can only be used for private historical preservation and family enjoyment. That restriction was recorded in 1923, and it has never been amended or revoked. Your covenant cannot override a deed restriction that was in place before the HOA existed. The room went quiet. Patricia's smile flickered. I'm not aware of any such restriction. I am, I said. I have a copy of the original deed in my folder. I also have a letter from the HOA's own attorney, dated 1998, confirming that the schoolhouse is not subject to HOA rules. Would you like to see it? I didn't wait for her answer. I opened my folder, pulled out the letter, and placed it on the table. The mustached board member picked it up. He read it slowly, his lips moving. When he finished, he looked at Patricia. Did you know about this? Patricia's composure cracked. That letter is 25 years old. The board's authority has evolved since then. The community's needs have changed. The deed hasn't changed, I said. The restriction hasn't changed. The law hasn't changed. You're using my property without permission, and you're charging parents for the privilege. That's not community enrichment. That's trespassing and fraud. A murmur rippled through the audience. The mother from the craft class stood up. Are you saying the workshop isn't legal? I paid $40. I brought my son here because the flyer said it was an official HOA program. Patricia raised her hands. The program is official. The board voted on it. Eleanor is simply misunderstanding the legal situation. I'm not misunderstanding anything, I said, but I'm willing to let the county building official sort it out. I've already scheduled an inspection for this Saturday during the next craft class. The official will be reviewing the building's safety compliance, occupancy limits, and whether the HOA has the proper permits to operate a public classroom in a private historic structure. The color drained from Patricia's face. You called the county? I called the county, I said. I also called the county recorder's office and requested a certified copy of the deed restriction. And I called my attorney, who has reviewed the HOA's covenants and confirmed that Section 14, Paragraph C, does not apply to properties with pre-existing deed restrictions. So here's what's going to happen. The craft class this Saturday will be the last one. You will refund every parent's money. You will return the key you somehow obtained to my building, and you will issue a written statement to the community clarifying that the schoolhouse is private property and was never authorized for HOA use. Patricia stared at me. Her clipboard lay forgotten on the table. The other board members were exchanging glances. The mustached man was still holding the 1998 letter, his expression troubled. You can't dictate terms to this board, Patricia said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. I'm not dictating terms, I said. I'm informing you of the legal reality. You have until Friday to cancel the class and issue refunds. If you don't, the county inspector will shut it down on Saturday, and I will file a formal complaint for trespassing and unauthorized commercial use of a protected historic property. The choice is yours. I picked up my folder and walked out of the clubhouse. The night air was cool and smelled of cut grass. I drove home, made a cup of tea, and added the board meeting notes to my folder. The investigation had actually begun weeks earlier, on the day I found the craft class in session. After I left the schoolhouse, I had driven directly to the county recorder's office. The recorder's office was housed in a squat brick building downtown, with fluorescent lights and the faint smell of old paper. I had spent many hours there over the years, researching the history of the schoolhouse and the surrounding properties. The clerks knew me by name. I requested the complete title chain for the schoolhouse parcel, the original HOA covenants, and any recorded easements or agreements between the HOA and the Vance property. The clerk, a woman named Mrs. Hendricks, who had helped me with research before, pulled the files without comment. I sat at a long wooden table and began to read. The title chain was straightforward. The parcel had been part of the original Vance homestead, deeded to Samuel Vance in 1898. The schoolhouse was built in 1901. In 1923, Samuel's son, my great-grandfather, had recorded a deed restriction limiting the property's use to private historical preservation and family enjoyment. The restriction had been included in every subsequent deed transfer, including the one from my grandfather to me. The HOA covenants were filed in 1997. They included the standard language about dues, architectural standards, and common areas. They also included Section 14, Paragraph C, the historically significant structures clause that Patricia had quoted. But there was an addendum, filed separately in 1998, that explicitly listed the Vance Schoolhouse parcel as excluded from HOA jurisdiction. The addendum was signed by the developer, the HOA's original attorney, and my grandfather. I made copies of everything. Then I dug deeper. I pulled the HOA's incorporation documents, its annual filings, and its insurance records. I pulled the county tax records for the Schoolhouse parcel, which confirmed that I had paid every tax bill on time and that the property was classified as a private historic structure, not a commercial or public building. I pulled the county's building code requirements for public educational facilities, which included mandatory bathroom access, fire exits, occupancy permits, and liability insurance. The Schoolhouse met none of those requirements. Then I found the document that changed everything. It was a letter filed in the county recorder's office in 1999 from the HOA's insurance carrier. The letter stated that the HOA's liability policy did not cover activities conducted on properties that were not part of the HOA's legal jurisdiction. The letter specifically mentioned the Vance Schoolhouse as an example of a property that was outside the association's insurable boundaries. The HOA had known for over 2 decades that its insurance did not cover the schoolhouse. Patricia had either not checked the insurance policy or she had ignored it. Either way, she had been operating a children's program in a building with no insurance coverage. I made a copy of the insurance letter. I placed it in my folder. The next day, I called my attorney, a woman named Sarah Chen who specialized in property law. Sarah had handled my grandfather's estate and knew the schoolhouse deed inside out. I explained the situation. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "They're using your property for paid programming without permission, without insurance, and in violation of a recorded deed restriction. They're also charging fees under the HOA's name, which could constitute fraud if the parents were told the program was authorized. You have every legal right to shut this down. Do you want me to send a cease and desist letter?" "Not yet," I said. "I want to give them enough rope." Sarah paused. "What do you mean?" "I mean Patricia is going to keep pushing. She's already convinced the board that she has the authority. She's not going to back down because of a letter from a lawyer. She's going to double down. And when she does, I want to have everything documented. Every violation, every false claim, every parent who paid money for an uninsured program. I want the case to be so clear that the HOA's own insurance company refuses to defend them." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've thought about this." "I've had time," I said. Patricia gave me 3 weeks between her first request and the first class. She thought I was ignoring her. I was preparing. Sarah agreed to hold off on the cease and desist letter. She also agreed to review the HOA covenants and the deed restriction and prepare a formal legal opinion that I could use if the situation escalated. I spent the next week gathering more evidence. I photographed the schoolhouse interior and exterior, documenting the original condition of every surface. I interviewed the mother from the craft class, whose name was Angela, and got a written statement about the $40 fee and the lack of bathroom access. I found 2 other parents who had signed their children up for the workshop and obtained copies of their registration forms, which clearly stated that the program was an official HOA community education initiative. I also discovered how Patricia had obtained a key to the schoolhouse. My cousin Daniel, the carpenter, had kept a spare key in his workshop for emergencies. Patricia had approached him 2 months earlier, claiming that the HOA needed access to the schoolhouse for a historical survey. Daniel, trusting and unaware of the conflict, had given her the key. When I told him what had happened, he was mortified. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor," he said. "She seemed so official. She had a clipboard and everything." "It's not your fault," I said. "But I need the key back." Daniel called Patricia that afternoon and demanded the return of the key. Patricia refused, claiming it was now HOA property. Daniel recorded the call. I added the recording to my folder. By the time the board meeting happened, my folder contained over 60 pages of documents, photographs, statements, and recordings. I had a complete chain of evidence showing that Patricia had knowingly and repeatedly violated my property rights, misled the HOA board, and charged parents for an uninsured program in a building that was not safe for public use. And I hadn't even played my strongest card yet. The Saturday of the final craft class dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the schoolhouse at 8:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the class was scheduled to start. I was not alone. Sarah Chen, my attorney, was with me. So was Mr. David Okonkwo, the county building official. And so was a reporter from the local newspaper, a young woman named Jess, who had been covering community issues and had expressed interest in the story when I called her. We parked on the gravel shoulder and waited. At 8:45, the first minivan arrived. A mother dropped off 2 children, waved at Patricia, who was already inside setting up, and drove away. More cars arrived. By 9 o'clock, there were 18 children inside the schoolhouse, along with Patricia and 2 HOA volunteers. The portable toilet Patricia had mentioned was nowhere in sight. I got out of my truck. Sarah, Mr. Okonkwo, and Jess followed me to the schoolhouse door. I opened it without knocking. The children looked up. Patricia, who was at the front of the room holding a bag of felt squares, froze. "Good morning, Patricia," I said. "I'd like to introduce you to Mr. David Okonkwo from the County Building Department. He's here to conduct a safety inspection of this facility." Mr. Okonkwo stepped forward. He was a tall man in a gray suit, carrying a clipboard of his own. "Ma'am, I need to see your occupancy permit, your certificate of insurance, and your facility license for operating a public educational program in this building." Patricia's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, anger, and then a desperate attempt at composure. "This is a private event," she said. "We don't need permits for a private event." "This is not a private event," Sarah said. "You advertised it on the HOA website. You charged a fee. You're using a building that is not your property. Under county code, that constitutes a public educational program, which requires an occupancy permit, a facility license, and liability insurance. Do you have any of those?" Patricia didn't answer. Mr. Okonkwo began walking through the schoolhouse, making notes on his clipboard. He counted the children, he checked the exits. He noted the absence of a bathroom. He examined the potbelly stove, which was not operational but still represented a fire hazard in a room full of children. He looked at the electrical outlets, which were original to the 1940s renovation and not up to current code for public buildings. After 10 minutes, he turned to Patricia. "Ma'am, this building does not meet the minimum safety requirements for a public educational facility. There is no bathroom, no running water, no fire suppression system, and the electrical system is not rated for public occupancy. I'm going to have to ask you to end this class immediately." Patricia's clipboard clattered to the floor. "You can't do this. The HOA board authorized this program. We have insurance. Your insurance does not cover this building," I said. I pulled the 1999 insurance letter from my folder and handed it to her. "Your own insurance carrier confirmed, 24 years ago, that the schoolhouse is outside the HOA's insurable boundaries. You've been operating without coverage." Patricia stared at the letter. Her hands were shaking. This is from 1999. Things could have changed." "They haven't," Sarah said. "I called the insurance company yesterday. They confirmed that the policy has never been amended to include the schoolhouse. If a child had been injured in this building, the HOA would have been personally liable. The board members who authorized this program could have been sued individually." The 2 HOA volunteers, who had been standing silently at the back of the room, exchanged panicked looks. One of them, the woman Patricia had called Mrs. Patterson, stepped forward. "Patricia, you told us this was all approved. You said the insurance was handled." "It is handled," Patricia said, but her voice was thin. "There's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "You used my property without permission. You charged parents for an uninsured program. You misled the board, the volunteers, and the community. And you did it all because you believed that your authority as HOA president gave you the right to take whatever you wanted." I turned to the parents who had gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. Angela was among them, her son holding her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "the craft class is canceled. The HOA did not have permission to use this building. The program was not insured. Your children were not safe here. I'm sorry you were misled. You should request a full refund from the HOA." A murmur of anger rippled through the crowd. A man in a baseball cap stepped forward. "I paid $80 for 2 kids. Are you telling me the HOA just took my money for an illegal program?" "I'm telling you the program was unauthorized and uninsured," I said. "The HOA board will need to address the refunds." Patricia stumbled out of the schoolhouse, her face pale. "This is all a misunderstanding. The board will issue refunds. We'll sort this out." "You'll sort it out now," Angela said, her voice sharp. "I want my money back today." Other parents echoed her. Patricia looked around at the angry faces, the crying children, the county official writing his report, the reporter taking photographs, and me, standing quietly with my folder in my hands. "This is your fault," she hissed at me. "You could have just let us use the building." "None of this would have happened. You're right," I said. None of this would have happened if you had respected my property rights, but you didn't, so here we are. Mr. Okonkwo completed his report and handed a copy to Patricia. You'll be receiving a formal notice of violation from the county. Operating a public educational facility without a permit carries a fine of up to $5,000 per day. I strongly advise you to cease all activities in this building immediately. Patricia took the report with trembling hands. She looked at the parents, the volunteers, the reporter, and the county official. Then she turned and walked to her Lexus. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She walked with the stiff, mechanical gait of someone whose entire world had just collapsed. She got into her car and drove away. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks. The HOA board held an emergency meeting, which I attended. Patricia was not present. The mustached board member, whose name was Richard, opened the meeting with a statement. The board has reviewed the documentation provided by Ms. Vance. It is clear that the craft workshop program was initiated without proper authorization, without proper insurance, and in violation of the Vance Schoolhouse deed restriction. The board takes full responsibility for this failure of oversight. Effective immediately, Patricia Barlow has resigned as HOA president. The room erupted in applause. Richard continued. The board has also voted to issue full refunds to all parents who paid for the workshop series. The refunds will be processed within 10 business days. Additionally, the board will be conducting a full audit of all HOA programs to ensure that no other activities are operating without proper authorization or insurance. I stood up. I appreciate the board's actions. I want to be clear that I am not opposed to the community enjoying the schoolhouse. I have always given tours to anyone who asked. But the building is private property, and it will remain private property. Any future use must be with my explicit permission, in writing, and with proper insurance. Richard nodded. Understood. The board will also be amending the HOA covenants to clarify that the historically significant structures clause does not apply to properties with pre-existing deed restrictions. We should have done that years ago. The meeting adjourned. As I walked out, Angela approached me. I'm sorry I blamed you, she said. I didn't understand what was happening. Patricia made it sound like you were just being difficult. She was good at that, I said. She was good at making people believe her version of reality. But reality has a way of catching up. Angela's son tugged at her hand. Mommy, can we still do crafts? I looked down at him. Tell you what, I said. Next weekend, I'm going to be at the schoolhouse doing some preservation work. If your mom brings you by, I'll give you a tour and show you how we restore old wood. No glue, no macaroni, just history. The boy's eyes widened. Can I use a hammer? We'll see, I said. Angela smiled. We'll be there. The county issued a formal warning to the HOA, but no fines were imposed because the program had been shut down voluntarily. The insurance company sent a letter to the board, reminding them of the policy's coverage limitations. The local newspaper ran a story titled, HOA President Resigns After Unauthorized Schoolhouse Program Exposed. Patricia Barlow put her house on the market 2 months later. I heard from a neighbor that she and her husband moved to a different subdivision, one without a historic schoolhouse on its border. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I simply added the newspaper clipping to my folder and placed the folder in the schoolhouse desk where my grandfather had kept his attendance ledgers. The schoolhouse returned to its quiet purpose. I replaced the lock with a new one, a modern deadbolt that couldn't be opened with a borrowed skeleton key. I gave Daniel a new key, with strict instructions not to lend it to anyone. I spent the next several weekends at the schoolhouse, repairing the minor damage the craft classes had caused. Glue residue on the desks, crayon marks on the windowsill, a small scratch on the floor where a folding table had been dragged. Each repair felt like an act of restoration, not just of the building, but of my family's legacy. One Sunday afternoon, I sat in the teacher's chair and looked out the window at the subdivision beyond the gravel path. The houses were identical, the mailboxes were identical, the lawns were identical, but the schoolhouse was unique. It was a piece of history that had survived a century of change, and it would survive a century more. I opened my grandfather's journal and read a passage he had written in 1985, the year he began the restoration. This building has seen generations of children learn their letters. It has seen wars and depressions, and the slow march of progress. It stands because we stand. It remembers because we remember. It is not a museum. It is a promise. I closed the journal. The afternoon light slanted through the wavy glass windows, casting golden patterns on the honey-colored floor. The smell of old wood and chalk dust filled the air. Outside, a dog barked, a car passed, a child laughed. The world went on, but inside the schoolhouse, everything was exactly as it should be. Quiet, private, preserved. I picked up my folder, the one labeled Schoolhouse HOA, and placed it on the shelf next to my grandfather's journals. I didn't know if I would ever need it again, but if I did, it was ready, and so was I.